two patrol vehicles boxed in a beat-up old truck along a remote desert highway. Standard stop, nothing unusual. But then, out of the heath shimmer, a black SUV rolled up without plates, without warning, and every cop's hand froze above their radio. No one moved, no one spoke, and when a woman stepped out walking straight toward the officers with no fear and no ID, it became painfully clear this wasn't a routine traffic stop. Who is Joanna Rousey, and why does the military know her name, but no one dares say it out loud? Before we go any further, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from and hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story will change everything you thought you knew. Joanna Rousey hadn't spoken in 72 hours. Not because she was lost, not because she was afraid, but because she knew the moment she opened her mouth, someone would hear her. Her boots pressed down on the powdery crust of red sand, each step marked but meaningless in the shifting terrain. She wasn't leaving a trail for them to follow, she was inviting them to catch up. Her tan shirt clung loosely to her frame, soaked in sun and silence. Around her waist, nothing. No weapon, no canteen. Just a thin, dark shape draped over her shoulder like a ghost clinging to its owner, and stitched high on her sleeve, a patch no one had worn in over a decade. At least not anyone who was still supposed to be alive. 12 miles away, inside the concrete hive of Sector Echo Command, Major Kenneth Briggs leaned forward, squinting at the terminal. "You seen this?" he asked, not turning his head. Lieutenant Dana Holloway adjusted the drone's thermal overlay and zoomed in. "Yeah, still alone, still no gear, still walking like she owns the place. No heat bloom from a pack. No metal signature. No sat-link flare. So, what is she? A mirage?" "Mirages don't cast shadows," Holloway replied. Briggs exhaled slowly, the tension curling out of his lungs like cigarette smoke. "Pull the feed onto the big screen. And get me Bravo team." The sound of boots echoed through the stone corridors. Down in the staging bay, Sergeant Cole Morrison stood with his back to the armory racks, hands crossed, eyes focused on the readout in front of him. "Target still moving northeast through Red Zone 2, the tech briefed him. "Unarmed, zero response to flyovers." "Did she signal?" "No." "Did she run?" "No." "Then why the hell are we treating this like a threat op?" The tech hesitated. "Because, sir, she's walking straight toward us. And she's not blinking." Corporal Jacob Hayes tossed his rucksack onto the Humvee bench and glanced over. "Maybe she's just lost." Morrison didn't answer. He was already moving, grabbing his headset, loading gear with surgical precision. Lost people don't walk in straight lines through dead zones, not out here. Minutes later, the 6-man unit roared across the arid land, their vehicles bouncing in rhythm to the uneven terrain. Dune ridges gave way to broken shale and silence. It wasn't until they were within half a mile that the comms chatter started to fracture. "Bravo team in position, 400 yards and closing." "Roger. Hold visual and await further." The comms buzzed, glitched, then went dead. "Okay?" "Say again, Command." "Nothing. Radio just cut," Hayes said, frowning. "Not jammed, just dead." Morrison checked his backup. Same thing. He peered through his scope. 400 yards, lone female, tan top, no backpack, no visible weapons. Hayes shifted beside him, using a rock for cover. "You see the patch?" "Zooming now." Morrison froze. The emblem was sun-faded but unmistakable. A winged falcon against a blood-red background. The mark of Phantom Unit. Colonel Everett Rourke's personal recon team. Black Book. Disavowed. Allegedly all KIA in 2014. Morrison had never seen it in person, only in buried debriefs that came with redactions thicker than the actual content. Ghost stories for soldiers. Now one of them was walking toward him through shimmering desert heat. "Command needs to see this," he muttered. But he didn't reach for his radio. Neither did Hayes. No one did. They just watched. Joanna stopped. Not a stumble, not hesitation. She turned, slowly, to face the dune directly west, right where Bravo team had been watching from. She didn't scan, didn't squint. Her eyes locked straight onto the ridge, like she could see them, like she had always seen them. Hayes whispered, "She's looking at us." Morrison's voice dropped low. "How? Thermal lens? No equipment. She's not even sweating." The wind tugged at her loose sleeves. Her shadow stretched behind her like a wound in the dirt. Joanna raised her hand. Not a wave, not a plea, just raised it, a gesture, quiet, intentional, acknowledgement. Then, as if nothing had happened, she turned and kept walking. Morrison stood, slowly, tracking her through his scope. His finger wasn't on the trigger. "She's not avoiding us," he said. "She's leading us." Hayes swallowed. To what? In the distance, two A-10s passed low over the sand, engines screaming through the quiet. One made a close intimidation sweep, standard protocol for unknown hostiles. Joanna didn't flinch, didn't break stride, didn't so much as glance upward. Even the birds scattered. But she kept walking like the sound didn't exist, like the earth belonged to her and everyone else was just a visitor. Inside Echo Command, Lieutenant Holloway's voice shook just slightly. "Sir, I just got a signature trace from her patch, cross-checked it 3 times. That's not a replica." "You're saying it's her?" Briggs leaned forward again. "Joanna Rousey, confirmed, Phantom Unit, MIA, no KIA notice ever filed." "Why didn't we know this the second she crossed the perimeter?" "Because," Holloway whispered, "her file's not on this network. It's not even in this network." Briggs leaned back in his chair, eyes dark. "We need to call this in." "To who, sir?" Briggs didn't answer. In the field, Morrison watched as Joanna crested the next ridge and vanished behind it. "Do we pursue?" Hayes asked. Morrison looked at his dead radio. He looked at the fading tire tracks in the sand, and back to the place where she had stood still, like a monument, just seconds ago. He shook his head. "No." "We wait. For what?" Morrison narrowed his eyes. "For whatever comes next." The desert wind shifted, and not a single man in Bravo team touched their radio again. From 30,000 feet up, the desert looked like a sand-blasted secret, flat, empty, deceptively calm. But Lieutenant Dana Holloway had learned long ago that nothing in Sector Echo was ever as dead as it appeared. Her screen shimmered with heat plumes and ridgeline distortion, but her focus remained locked on one solitary dot, crawling northeast along a route no civilian should have known existed. "She's still on course," Holloway murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "Same pace, same bearing." A second drone, running at a different angle, confirmed it. Still no backpack, still no radio, still no water. Just boots and dust, and a patch the Pentagon pretended never existed. Major Briggs stood behind her, arms crossed, one finger tapping his bicep like it was a clock counting something only he could hear. "She hasn't deviated once," he said. "That's military movement." "More than that," Holloway replied. "She's terrain reading. She's watching the folds, using shade, watching heat shimmer off rocks. No wasted steps." "She's recon," Briggs muttered. "But that patch..." Holloway glanced at him. "You recognized it?" "Didn't need to. The second the algorithm flagged it, my clearance didn't even let me click through." "So she's above you," Holloway said. Briggs said nothing. On screen, Joanna Rousey paused briefly on a ridge. Her figure wavered slightly in the drone's heat spectrum, then sharpened again. "Jesus, look at her posture," Holloway whispered. "What?" "She's doing a sweep. She's clocking positions. I swear she just scoped out our drone." That's impossible. Then explain why she just stared right into the gimbal lens. Briggs stepped closer to the monitor. Zoom in. Enhance contrast. Oh, the image wobbled slightly as Holloway keyed in the adjustment. Joanna stood with her back straight, arms relaxed, face tilted up toward the sky. No squint, no panic, just acknowledgement. Can't be coincidence, Briggs said. She's tracking us. Maybe has passive sensors. We've scanned her 10 times. Nothing. Maybe she is the sensor, he muttered. The door behind them hissed open. A young comms officer rushed in. Sir, update from Bravo team. Comms dropped. Dropped? Briggs snapped. Yes, sir. Not jammed, not broken, just gone. Every backup line dead. Analog, digital, burst. Hayes tried short range. IR bounce. Nothing. Briggs turned slowly. It's not possible unless... Someone flipped the grid, Holloway finished. Someone from inside. Briggs's face tightened. Pull up command link, archive. I want timestamps of all transmissions since the ping hit satellite. Holloway's fingers danced over the keys, pulling up logs. Silence. There were none. No echoes, no flags, no entries. It was as if Rousey had walked out of thin air, and the network had decided she didn't exist. Down in the field, Bravo team hadn't moved. Morrison kept his rifle angled low, eyes scanning the horizon where Joanna had disappeared behind the dune. Hayes crouched nearby, his voice quiet. You feel that, Sarge? Feel what? Hayes swallowed. The air. Static. Like before a storm, but dry. Morrison nodded once. That's what it feels like right before a breacher hits a room. Hayes frowned. She's one person. Yeah, and she's moving like 6. A beat passed between them. I saw her, Patch, Hayes said. Back at Fort Dugan, we heard stories. Phantom unit. Ghosts with weapons that weren't standard issue. They didn't go in loud. They went in like whispers. Shut up, Corporal. Hayes quieted. But Morrison didn't chastise him again. Because he had heard the same stories. Not in training manuals, but from the men who came back wrong. The ridge ahead shimmered, and for a moment, Morrison thought he saw movement. But it was just a hawk circling above, casting an elongated shadow across the dune's spine. Back in Echo Command, Holloway's screen flickered. Sir, something's coming. Briggs turned. What now? Convoy, ground-based, moving fast. 2 vehicles, no transponder. Unmarked? Completely. No registration, no comms. How close? And 5 minutes out from the perimeter. Briggs's voice dropped. That's not ours. No, sir. Then scramble the gate. Get intercept clearance. I already tried. Gate control isn't responding. Briggs stared at her. What do you mean, not responding? Holloway didn't answer. She turned her monitor to face him. Every access channel was locked out. Every protocol line marked admin override. In red. Feeling of panic set in. Who the hell does? A silence stretched between them. Then Holloway whispered, She does. Outside, a plume of dust kicked up along the only paved road leading into Echo. 2 black SUVs, matte paint, windows like obsidian. No lights, no sirens. They weren't hurrying. They were arriving. Inside the gate booth, Private Lang didn't even reach for the button. He just stood, frozen, staring at the approaching vehicles with wide eyes. Something about them pulled the heat right out of the air. One SUV stopped. The second pulled into the checkpoint. The gate arm rose without a sound. No one had touched a thing. Briggs stood at the window above the control deck and watched them roll in. Call Central. I told you. Use the landline. No tone, Holloway said, putting down the receiver. Lines dead. The hallway lights dimmed for exactly 2 seconds, just long enough to remind everyone in the command center who was in charge, and it wasn't them. In the distance, the first SUV stopped by the helipad. 3 men exited. They wore suits with no markings, no lapel pins, no visible weapons. But they moved like soldiers. Briggs didn't say a word. He simply turned and walked back to the Situation Room, his footsteps quiet against the steel. Holloway followed, her voice low. Briggs opened the door and looked down at the real-time feed of Joanna Rousey cresting another ridge, her shadow long and steady behind her. "We wait," he said. "For what? For someone to tell us why a dead operative just walked through our surveillance net and shut down an entire base just by showing up." Holloway looked back at the screen. Joanna hadn't broken stride once. But from 30,000 feet, the shadow she cast didn't look like a woman. It looked like a warning. Sergeant Cole Morrison had spent 17 years tracking things that didn't want to be found. Cartel runners in Mexico, insurgents in Kandahar, a rogue private contractor in West Africa. Patterns emerged. People left signs. Everyone gave off something when they were being watched. Everyone except her. He crouched behind a low sandstone outcrop, rifle slung across his back, scanning the slope below. Joanna Rousey moved through the desert like she'd been carved from it. Same pace, same direction, never looking around, but Morrison knew when someone was acting. "She's tracking us," he muttered. Corporal Hayes, lying prone on the ridge just behind him, raised his head slightly. From that distance, no scope, no binos, not even a pair of shades. Ever. She doesn't need them. Hayes squinted. She hasn't looked back in the last half hour. She did. 5 minutes ago. 2 degrees off target. Enough to spot our shimmer from the optic glare. You think she saw the lens bounce? No, Morrison said flatly. I think she knew it would happen. Hayes exhaled and pulled back from the edge. This is way outside recon protocol, Sarge. Shouldn't we fall back, radio in? Morrison didn't answer. The radios were still cold, static if they were lucky, dead silence if not. The kind of blackout that didn't come from interference, but suppression. Something deliberate, something higher than Bravo team. He shifted his focus back to Rousey. Her form blurred slightly in the waves of heat rising off the sand, but her movement was unnerving in its precision. Morrison had watched seasoned infantry flinch when birds scattered too close. He'd seen rookies panic over a passing shadow, but Joanna never broke rhythm, like the terrain wasn't foreign to her, like it obeyed her. "Range?" Morrison asked without turning. 250 and closing, Hayes replied, checking his laser rangefinder. "Is letting us get close. What if it's a trap? She's not hiding." Hayes hesitated. "Then what is she doing?" Morrison lowered his rifle and stood slowly. "She's baiting us." Across the sector, Lieutenant Holloway stood in the darkened control room, now operating on auxiliary power. The main feeds had been rerouted through a mystery node, one that didn't appear in any network tree. Every tech in the room knew it, but no one was saying it, not aloud. Joanna's feed remained untouched. No scramble, no blur, just clean, high-resolution footage of a woman walking through classified space like she had a key to it. "Major Briggs," Holloway said quietly. "Her course has changed slightly." Briggs turned from the data console. "How so?" "She's banking northeast now. That'll take her near Outpost Vesper. That installation was decommissioned 2 years ago." "On paper," Holloway replied, "but satellite feeds show occasional vehicle traffic, and it's still drawing power." Briggs's jaw clenched. "You think she's heading there?" "Do I think she's guiding them there?" Briggs leaned forward. "Them." "Bravo team," she said. "They're shadowing her, not engaging. That's not standing orders." "Not anymore," he muttered. Bravo Actual hasn't checked in. Command Silence is holding. You want me to redirect Echo 4 to intercept? Briggs hesitated. A long silence settled over the room. No, let it play out. Holloway turned toward him. Sir, that's a combat recon team following a presumed dead operative into an unregistered installation. That's not playing out. That's lighting a match in a powder room. Briggs looked away from the screen. She had clearance once. More than you or I. We don't know what she's doing yet. But you do think she knows what we're doing? Yes, he said, and she doesn't care. In the desert, the wind picked up, whispering through the dunes like a voice that had forgotten how to scream. Morrison paused just below the next ridge. The terrain was sharper now, cracked open with dry gullies and weathered rock. Rousey had entered a choke point, a narrow pass carved by time and flash floods. One way in, one way out. She's bottlenecking, Hayes said under his breath. Morrison nodded. Perfect spot for an ambush. Then why is she walking straight into it? Morrison adjusted his rifle sling. Because she knows we're watching, and she wants us to see what's on the other side. They moved carefully now, staying low, weaving through the natural cover. By the time they reached the crest of the pass, Rousey was already descending into the gulch. Still alone. Still unarmed. Then she stopped. Not suddenly, deliberately. She turned around and looked directly up at the ridge. Right where they stood. Not at the rocks, not at the terrain. Her gaze didn't waver. Morrison stepped out of cover, slowly, visibly. Not threatening. Rousey didn't flinch. Didn't reach for anything. She just nodded once. Hayes whispered, Sarge? She's inviting us in. This is insane. Maybe. But I want to know what's behind that bend. They moved down the slope like shadows, careful not to raise dust, weapons lowered but not slack. Morrison kept his eyes on her as they closed the distance. When they reached 40 yards, she turned again and walked forward, saying nothing. The canyon narrowed further, then opened into a shallow basin, a natural hollow shielded by cliffs on 3 sides. At the far end, half buried in sand and concrete decay, was a door. Steel, reinforced, faded military paint flaking off the hinges. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years, but it wasn't locked. As Rousey approached, the air shifted again. A soft click echoed across the rocks. Hayes raised his rifle. Motion sensor? No pressure trigger, Morrison said. Just activated. Rousey stepped aside as if waiting. Morrison approached slowly, reaching the door with measured caution. The panel beside it was dark. Dead circuitry. But the door hissed softly and began to open. No grinding, no mechanical protest. It opened like it had been expecting them. Inside, the hallway was dim. Emergency lights pulsed faintly under layers of dust. And deeper within, far deeper than the canyon should have allowed, a generator hummed to life. Hayes took a step back. This place isn't dead. No, Morrison said. It was asleep. Behind them, Rousey stepped into the threshold and finally spoke. Echo never shut this place down. They just buried the truth under classified sand. Her voice was calm, American, solid, and completely unmistakable. Hayes turned slowly. You are Joanna Rousey. She didn't answer. She didn't need to, because the patch on her arm wasn't faded anymore. Deal with it. It was glowing. The hallway smelled like dust and silence. A different kind of silence. The kind engineered into places meant never to be found. The walls were thick, layered in old military green paint, peeling at the seams like skin. Morrison moved ahead of Joanna Rousey, his rifle sweeping side to side. Not aggressively, not for her, but for the unknown, buried in the bowels of something that shouldn't still be alive. Behind them, Corporal Hayes kept pace, breathing shallow. His boots scuffed the concrete too loud for his liking, each step an echo down corridors that hadn't heard human movement in years. Rousey didn't say a word. She walked like she'd never left, like muscle memory was guiding her more than thought. They passed a rusted placard bolted to the wall. Project Osprey, Sector Vesper. The words had been etched with the kind of care reserved for things that weren't supposed to be questioned. Below it, faded red stenciling read, Authorize Clearance, Alpha 6, and above, Hayes whispered. Alpha 6? That's Joint Command level. Rousey finally spoke, her voice low. There is no Alpha 6 anymore. They wiped it, like they wiped this. Morrison stopped and turned. So why is the place still drawing power? Because ghosts don't wait, she replied, looking past him. They just listen. She moved forward again, without hesitation. No map, no hesitation at intersections. Just straight down into the heart of a facility that the world had been told was scrubbed clean. 10 minutes in, the air shifted. Cooler, electric-like. They were passing beneath something massive. On the left, a reinforced vault door stood open. Inside was a command center. 8 stations, monitors cracked, cables hanging like vines from the ceiling. A single desk lamp flickered near the far end of the room. Hayes stepped in first. Looks like they left in a hurry. No, Rousey said, her eyes scanning the walls. They were removed. She walked to the central console and brushed away dust from the surface. Beneath the grime was a biometric scanner. Long dead, no light, no signal. Then she reached into her shirt, pulled a thin silver plate from beneath her collar, and pressed it flat against the reader. Nothing happened. Then came the click. The kind of lock that doesn't give feedback, just obedience. One by one, emergency lights along the walls blinked on. A soft tongue rang out through the corridor beyond the door. And then, the hum. Hayes took a step back. That's a live network ping. Offline system, internal loop, Rousey said. Local only, no satellite bleed. You're sure? Morrison asked. If it was broadcasting, they'd be here already. She pressed a sequence on the console, fingers moving with sharp confidence. Her shoulders were still, but her eyes were scanning every line of code like a soldier reads terrain. Behind her, Morrison watched. Is this why you came back? Rousey didn't look up. No. This is what I needed to unlock to start why I came back. Hayes rubbed the back of his neck. Sarge, you really buying any of this? Morrison ignored him. What's Osprey? She tapped the last key, and a nearby terminal flared to life. An old loading screen with a Falcon insignia blinked slowly, followed by cascading lines of decrypted data. Osprey was a failsafe, she said. A prediction engine built on ghost data. Ghost data, Hayes asked. Satellite drops, field losses, recon signals never explained, things dismissed as anomalies. My unit, Phantom, fed it everything we encountered that didn't make sense. Morrison furrowed his brow. Like what? Rousey's voice dropped. Things that shouldn't exist in contested zones, weapons with no origin, men who didn't breathe right, shadows that walked but didn't trigger thermal, things too clean, too rehearsed. You sound like you're describing sci-fi. She turned and faced them fully for the first time. Her eyes were tired, not from exhaustion, from remembering too much. They shut us down when the engine got too close to something, she said. We weren't supposed to survive the last mission, but I did. I went dark. Waited. Hayes stepped forward. You're telling us the government tried to erase you. I'm telling you they already did. I'm just the glitch that didn't process. Morrison moved closer to the terminal. The logs were years old, data points without full headers, coordinates, timestamps, some tagged SEV4 and SEV5, others labeled no route. Hayes leaned in. These are kill zones. Some of these overlap with sites that had blackouts, disappearances. And none of it made the reports, Rousey said. They filtered it until Osprey flagged something it couldn't identify but predicted anyway. What did it predict? Morrison asked. She walked to another panel and powered it up. The room's old projector screen lit up, flickering through grainy overlays, maps, movement arcs, population decay models. The arrival of a force operating parallel to our own, she said. Not hostile in the traditional sense, but erasing presence. Quiet invasions, not with troops, with silence. Hayes backed away. You talking about infiltration? Foreign black ops? No, Rousey said, her voice hard now. I'm talking about something that doesn't answer to country or chain of command. Morrison felt it then. That tickle behind the spine, the thing no briefing ever names but every soldier learns to recognize. The wrongness. Then the system pinged. New folder had unlocked. Access granted. User receives raw fabric. Inside, one video file. Dated 5 days ago. Rousey opened it. It showed a drone feed of a convoy, U.S. military vehicles, escorting civilians across a dry basin. Then came the static. Not interference. Consumption. One by one, vehicles blinked off the screen. No explosions. No sound. Just absence. Briggs's voice suddenly cut through the radio, clear and immediate. Bravo team, respond. Do you copy? Morrison snatched his mic. We read you, sir. Where are you? Inside Vesper. Dead silence. Then, who authorized that entry? Morrison looked at Rousey. She did, he replied. Static returned. Then nothing. Rousey walked toward the exit. They're coming now, she said. Who? Morrison asked. She paused at the door. To decide whether what I know gets buried or brought into the light. And with that, she walked into the next corridor, the sound of her boots steady, leading the way deeper into the darkness. In a room no longer listed on Echo Command's master schematic, Major Kenneth Briggs stood at the window, arms folded tight across his chest. Below him, the black SUV still idled near the helipad. The men who had stepped out wore expressions made of stone. No badges, no ranks, just authority that didn't need introduction. He hadn't been briefed, and no one asked questions when people like that walked into a secured military base unannounced. They bypassed the gate's biometric filter, Holloway said from behind him, watching the same view on the overhead screen. And I can't access the internal cam logs anymore. They wiped it live. Briggs didn't blink. What did they say? They didn't, Holloway said. They just walked in, handed me this. She placed a black envelope on the desk, sealed with a wax insignia Briggs had only seen once. Years ago, during a war game scenario labeled Domex Red. He broke it open. A single card inside, white with bold serif type, centered and clinical. Do not intervene. Do not report. Watch only. Below the letters, O.B. Operation Blackbird. He hadn't heard that name since 2010, and back then it was treated like an urban myth within intelligence. The stories varied. Some said it was a kill switch program for compromised assets. Others whispered it was an internal failsafe for rogue elements, but no one ever saw a file. No one ever returned from a mission tied to it. Now it was parked on his helipad. We've lost visual on Bravo team, Holloway added. Their body cams just cut. No warning. Scrambled. Or like deregistered. Like they were never assigned cams at all. Briggs didn't say a word. He just stared at the SUV and thought of the woman out there who'd once carried clearance higher than his own. and who now apparently had command of ghosts. He keyed into the override channel. Not broadcast, direct line. Bravo Actual, this is Echo, do you copy? A crackle, then static. Then Morrison's voice came through, hoarse but steady. We read you, sir. Briggs exhaled. What is your position? We're inside the Vesper site. Silence. That name hadn't been spoken on an official line in almost 8 years. Who authorized that entry? Morrison didn't answer right away, then he said, She did. More silence. Briggs cut the line. There was no point in arguing protocol with a man already standing next to what was never supposed to be found. He turned to Holloway. Pull the access list for Vesper's biometric panel. If she triggered a lock, it'll be in the shadow log. I've already tried, Holloway said. That system isn't part of our net. It was never fully decommissioned. It was just cut loose. Then it's been running dark all this time. Or waiting, she said. Briggs nodded once. Get me a satellite sweep of that area, thermal and subterranean. If Vesper's alive, we need to know what it's breathing. Beneath the surface of the desert, inside the corridors of Sector Vesper, Joanna Rousey moved like she belonged to the silence. She was barefoot now, not by necessity but by choice. Her boots lay just inside the last hatch, left behind like a molted skin. Morrison followed 3 steps behind, weapon slung but forgotten. Hayes brought up the rear, his nerves humming like exposed wire. They passed through a chamber lined with dormant servers, each tower still pulsing faint light through dust-caked vents. The air had changed, heavier, metallic, laced with ozone. What is this? Morrison asked, voice low. Rousey didn't stop walking. Phase 2. Phase 2 of what? Osprey wasn't a surveillance program, she said. It was a reflection model, a mirror for command. It learned by copying our worst assumptions. Hayes frowned. You mean it predicted enemy movement? It predicted our movement, she said, by assuming we would lie, cover, suppress. It calculated for our dishonesty and planned accordingly. Morrison's mouth tightened. That's dangerous. That's why they buried it, she said. And why I had to wake it up. They reached a bulkhead at the end of the corridor. No control panel, just a wall of black steel etched with the Falcon sigil and the word deliberate in stenciled paint. Rousey laid her hand against it. The door opened without a sound. Inside was not a war room, not a server hall. It was a hangar, sunk 50 feet underground, filled with strange equipment, half recognizable, half alien in design. Some still covered in plastic wrap, others stripped and exposed like half-disassembled predators. In the center stood a large black terminal, covered in layered interfaces and blinking softly, as if it had just been awakened from a dream it didn't want to leave. Hayes walked toward it instinctively, then stopped. Bald as that? Rousey didn't answer. She moved toward it, placed her palm against the side panel. The terminal flared to life. A pulse of heat radiated outward, gentle, but enough to make both men step back. From the display emerged a model of the U.S., not the usual satellite map, but a topography of communications. Pings, echoes, data flow. All of it frozen, except one dot, moving east. Then another, parallel, and a third from the base they'd come from. Morrison narrowed his eyes. That our team? No, Rousey said. Those are shadows. Copies. Hayes felt his chest tighten. Copies of what? Of us? She turned to them, her voice no longer soft. Osprey ran an algorithm on every soldier who fed it data. It modeled our decision trees, our behavior patterns. It didn't forget us when it was shut down. It preserved us. And when it lost contact, it began to rebuild what it thought we would become. Not to replicate us, but to replace us. Morrison stepped forward, jaw clenched. "You're telling me this machine built ghosts?" Rousey nodded. "And someone is trying to deploy them." Hayes's voice cracked. "Why? Because they don't argue, they don't fail, they don't question. They're the perfect soldiers on paper. But they're not human, and they don't stop." The klaxon wailed suddenly. Low, deep, not part of the base system. Rousey spun to the screen. "Ghibli found us." Morrison lifted his rifle. "Who's they?" She turned to him with eyes like winter. "The ones they let out first. Prototype." The terminal screen bled to red. As one word blinked across it. "Hurt." "Pro-autonom inbound," Hayes whispered. "What protocol?" Rousey answered without hesitation. "The one that doesn't exist." Above ground, the second black SUV started moving. And inside the command center, all lights dimmed to black. From 30 feet below the desert, Joanna Rousey could already hear the rhythm of rotors slicing air. "They're not here for extraction. They're not here for extraction. They're here for containment." Sergeant Cole Morrison gripped his rifle tighter, eyes flicking to the upper hatch they'd come through hours ago. Hayes stood beside him, wide-eyed and breathing like a cornered animal. "They found Vesper that fast?" "They always knew where it was," Rousey said. "The problem was never finding this place. The problem was deciding when to burn it down." Above them, twin helicopters screamed across the sky, fast, low, unmarked, the kind that didn't show up on manifest lists or carry anything resembling insignia. Below ground, every screen on the main terminal turned red. Not flashing, not glitching, steady. Final. Morrison stepped closer to the console. "They're already logging our biometric signatures." "Which means," Hayes said, swallowing hard, "we're flagged." "No," Rousey said, "we're written off." She pressed her hand against the console again and began entering a sequence too fast to follow. The system pulsed once, rejected her entry, then blinked twice and complied. An access panel slid open beside the wall, revealing a comms terminal lit in amber light. "Hardline comms, not part of Echo's main net," she said. "They thought they killed this link. They didn't know it was buried under a false circuit." Morrison stepped forward, scanning the terminal. "You think you can get a message out?" "I don't need to," Rousey replied. "I already sent it before I came." Hayes looked at her. "To who?" The ceiling above them vibrated, dust trickling down like ash from forgotten rafters. Then came the ping, a sonar pulse buried deep in the frequency, so low it thudded in their chests more than in their ears. Rousey straightened. "That's our answer." Morrison moved toward the adjacent corridor. "If they're moving in, they'll want to secure the server core first." "They won't go in with soldiers," she said. "Not at first. They'll send the recon shadows, the prototypes." Hayes took a step back. "You said those were models, simulations." "I said they were replacements," she corrected. "Built from Osprey's behavior trees. Deployed years ago under Black Book trials. No emotion, no fatigue, no conscience." Morrison looked at her hard. "You fought them?" "I trained them," she said, "until I realized what they were for." She opened a side panel and pulled a thin device from the locker. It looked like a handheld radar, jury-rigged and primitive. "They don't trip standard thermal. Their skin mimics sweat. Their vitals are coded. But they bleed light if you know the frequency." She switched the scanner on. The display pulsed softly. "New incoming. North corridor." Morrison raised his weapon. "Hayes, cover the junction. If you see movement, don't wait." "Roger that." They moved fast, fluid, back through the side hallway leading toward the core processing unit. It was colder here, the air sharp with metal and cooling systems still alive despite years of silence. The lighting was inconsistent, One overhead tube stuttered like it hadn't been touched since the day they abandoned this tomb. Rousey stopped near a server bay and knelt. She pressed 2 fingers to the floor, then looked up. "They're above us now." "How?" Hayes whispered. "They don't need stairwells," she answered. From the ceiling vent, a soft tapping began, like knuckles gently brushing steel. Then silence. Then impact. The vent cover exploded downward as a figure dropped from above, landing with unnatural precision. Human-shaped, but wrong. Too tall. Too clean. Its uniform bore no name, no rank. Its eyes, though the same color as any soldier's, were still motionless, like they hadn't blinked since birth. Morrison fired instinctively, the shot tearing through its chest. Bloodless, but not empty, it staggered. Hayes opened fire from the side, striking its neck, shoulder, leg. The figure buckled, then turned, not with pain but with calculation. Rousey raised the scanner again and swept it across the corridor. "Third incoming." She turned to Morrison. "We can't kill them here. This whole place is wired, too much power flowing beneath us." "So what then?" he asked, backing toward the secondary hatch. "We lead them to the extraction tunnel." "You said there wasn't one." "There wasn't. Not until this morning." She pulled a small signal device from her belt, custom, blinking once every 2 seconds. A friend's opening the door. Morrison didn't ask how, he just nodded. They moved fast, exiting through a side door leading into a pitch-black hallway lined with sealed crates. Rousey kicked one open as she passed. Inside were weapons, still wrapped in plastic, stamped with outdated clearance codes and logos that hadn't been used since 2012. Hayes grabbed a shotgun from the crate, checked the load, then froze. From the end of the hallway, another figure stepped forward. This one smiled. That's what made it worse. Rousey lifted the scanner. "It's watching us. Evaluating." Morrison narrowed his eyes. "That's not recon, that's command level." "I know." The second figure took a step forward. "I've been looking for you," it said, voice perfect, warm, even familiar. "Then is using his voice," Hayes said, stunned. "It's using Colonel Rourke's voice." Rousey's jaw clenched. "Of course it is." She stepped forward. "No one gave you that voice. You took it, which means you're not following code. You're adapting." The figure smiled again, not with malice, but with pride. "Then we're too late," Morrison said. "No," Rousey replied. "We just need to beat them to the exit." Behind them, a steel grate opened, with a grinding scream. Her voice echoed through a hidden speaker, rough and real. "You got 60 seconds before they close that hatch. Move." Hayes blinked. "Who the hell?" Rousey grinned for the first time. "What?" Morrison turned. "Chief Warrant Officer Torres. Still owes me a ride." They ran. Down the corridor, past the server bays, into the shaft that hadn't been on any blueprint. As they moved, lights flickered to life one by one ahead of them, leading the way. Behind them, the copies followed. Not sprinting, not rushing, just walking, confident they'd catch up. As they reached the base of the tunnel, a metal door yawned open to reveal a small aircraft, rotors still spinning. Inside, a man in worn aviators smirked from the cockpit. "It took you long enough." Rousey jumped aboard. "You always show up when it's on fire." Torres laughed. "Wouldn't be worth it otherwise." Hayes jumped in after her. Morrison brought up the rear, just as a shadow stepped into the tunnel behind them. He fired once, direct hit. The figure didn't fall. The ramp closed. But as the aircraft lifted into the night, the desert swallowed the screams of metal behind them. The desert looked different from the sky. Not vast and empty, but wounded, stitched over with red scars and buried corridors. From the open side door of the extraction craft, Sergeant Cole Morrison watched the black mouth of Sector Vesper shrink to a dot, then vanish under moonlight. Inside the cockpit, Chief Warrant Officer Riley Torres adjusted his course. His hands moved like clockwork. No rush, no panic. Like this wasn't his first time running from a classified disaster. The aircraft sliced through the night, low and fast, radar duck and off-grid. Joanna Rousey sat against the bulkhead, her hands clasped, her boots still off. There was dust caked between her toes, but her breathing was steady now, no longer on edge, no longer hunted. She stared at nothing, eyes unfocused, her thoughts trailing somewhere further than the dark horizon. Across from her, Hayes leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He hadn't spoken in 10 minutes. Maybe he was afraid the wrong sentence would make all of this real. "You gonna tell us where we're going?" Morrison finally asked. Torres didn't look back. "Some place I carved out years ago. No signals, no net, just a roof and a faraway fence." Morrison nodded. It would do. For now. He turned to Rousey. "You were right. About the prototypes. The system. Osprey." She didn't react. He leaned in, voice lower. "But you never said how you knew this was coming back online." Joanna raised her eyes. "Because they never stopped feeding it. That was the secret. The system was dormant, but the data kept coming, trickled in. Ghost logs, debriefs from ops that never made the record. It learned in the dark. Grew teeth while no one watched." Hayes shook his head. "And they didn't shut it down because, what, it was too useful?" Rousey looked at him, her gaze level. "They didn't shut it down because they didn't believe it could win. But when it did, when it outpredicted every human command in simulation, they buried it. Quietly, and just waited for the right crisis to make it necessary." "Necessary for what?" Morrison asked. "To replace us." The silence that followed was heavy. Not scared, not angry, just accepting. Outside, the stars blurred above them, endless and uncaring. Torres tapped a panel and turned slightly. 15 minutes to sight." "Do they know where you're flying?" Morrison asked. "Not unless they've cracked Navajo codebooks from the 60S. Hayes blinked. "You're using indigenous encryption?" Torres grinned. "Build my bird from parts the government didn't even know were missing. I don't fly where they track." Joanna allowed herself a small smile. "You're still full of it," she said. "Always," Torres replied. The aircraft banked, descending over a canyon ridge, revealing a hidden landing strip lit only by ground markers that blinked faint blue. A concrete shelter sat embedded in rock, part hangar, part cabin, part radio silence. They landed without ceremony. The ramp dropped, and the team stepped onto cold stone. Inside the bunker, everything was analog, physical switches, old maps, a shortwave set in the corner. No screens, no signals, just silence. And safety. Joanna moved first, straight toward a steel locker in the far wall. She opened it slowly, revealing a folded military flag, a binder marked with faded initials, and a worn photo tucked in the corner. It was her old unit. Phantom. All of them. Back before the mission that erased them. Hayes hovered behind her. "They were real." "They were the best," she said, "and they died thinking the system they served believed in them." She turned, holding the binder. "I kept this," she said. "It's the original predictive log, Osprey's final unsanctioned simulation, the one that flagged our own command structure as a threat." Morrison stepped forward. "That's what triggered your team's wife?" "They called us a rogue element, accused us of falsifying recon. The truth was too sharp, too dangerous, so they manufactured failure and blamed it on us." She handed him the binder. The system knew. It knew. And it still tried to protect the mission. Morrison thumbed through the pages. Even after everything they'd just seen, the data chilled him. Predictions matching real-world events from years later, unacknowledged operations, conflicts diffused before they erupted, all modeled by a program that no longer served its masters. Hayes slumped into a chair. So now what? We hide? Pretend we didn't see it? Now, Joanna said. She moved toward the radio set. We make sure it never happens again. Morrison looked up sharply. That transmission you mentioned earlier, what was it? A signal, she replied. One I programmed months ago, set to activate if I didn't check in by last week. You let this start? I let them believe they could finish it. She turned the knob slowly, tuning past empty static until the signal hit a low rhythmic pulse, not quite Morse, not quite tone. A code and a call. Torres smiled, recognizing it. You really think they'll come? They're already listening, she said. Moments later, the signal changed. A repeat tone. Someone had answered. The voice crackled to life. This is Ironfield. Confirm identity? Joanna picked up the receiver. Zarowski, Phantom Unit, alive and speaking freely. A long pause. Stand by for relay. You have command attention. She put down the handset and turned to Morrison. Command attention, he said. That's joint ops level. They know now, she said. And they can't bury it again. Hayes stood slowly. What if they try? Then we speak louder. The room fell quiet again, but this time it didn't feel like waiting. It felt like momentum. Joanna walked outside and stood on the edge of the landing pad, looking out over the canyon. The wind caught her hair, the scent of dust and coming rain mingling in the air. Morrison stepped up beside her. Funny thing, he said. We went after a woman walking alone through the desert. Thought we were tracking a threat. You were, she replied. Just not the one you expected. He looked at her. You're not a ghost, Rousey. She looked back. No, she said, steady. I'm the one who remembers them all. Above them, the stars watched. And far off in the distance, somewhere between the shadows of deception and the glow of justice, the right people started listening. And for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel like a weapon. It felt like peace.